Mother of a person with autism, a force to reckon with, a pioneer in the field of autism in India, the founder of Action for Autism, an activist, educator, trainer, and advocate for the rights of persons with autism and of their families. Her mission? To train parents to take care of children with autism. Her untiring work also resulted in autism being included in the Disability Act passed by the Indian Parliament. There are nearly 50 schools for children with autism all over India, which replicate the model that she created. Currently focusing on exploring employment opportunities for young adults with autism and integrating young children into mainstream education, she has recently set up a residential facility for adults with autism. Let us welcome Mary Barua to talk on autism in India.
Okay. Good morning. That's going to be a tough act to follow, what Ben has just presented. However, sort of 4 years ago, sitting in a doctor's chamber, for the first time, I had heard the word autism. Leaving the chamber with my son, somebody mentioned that I have a son with autism, who was this charged particle who did not sleep, who did not speak. I dropped him at the nursery school he was going to, and I went to all the libraries that I had access to try and find out what the meaning was of this word that had just been thrown at me. Remember, this was prehistoric times before the birth of Google God. So there was no information that I could find, and I came up against this blank wall, which I used to call the black hole of information. From then till now, we have come very far. We are sitting here at this pretty amazing conference with participants and speakers from not just India, but way beyond. So we have come very, very far. And in this distance, lots of changes have happened, lots of awareness has been created, a lot of it by civil society, a lot of whom are sitting right here, people who've contributed by speaking to the community, speaking to policymakers, speaking to medical professionals and other professionals, and taking that awareness beyond. And so has, to an extent, the media, because the media is always looking for a peg to hang a good story on. So autism became this interesting story that they could cover, and that helped. And so did the entertainment industry as well, because by being able to make films such as Barfi and Haridas and TV serials like Aapki Antara, that created an enormous amount of awareness. However, despite all of that, the reality is that we have very few numbers on anything. What are the kind of services that we have? How many people are there that are trained? How many people with autism are there? We really do not have any numbers. So everything that I say now is really based on my experiences and the experiences of people who are sitting here from whom I've learned. And of course, a lot of my learning, as I'm sure the learning of everybody else has been, from people like Bill and Wen and Temple Grandin. In fact, it was Temple's book, Emergence Labeled Autistic, that first gave me an insight into what living with autism was for my son. So, how do I move this? So, over the years, screening and diagnosis is happening at a much earlier pace, more appropriately. There have been lots of changes in all of this. And I'm not going to talk too much about the good things that are happening, because we usually always talk about the amazing things that are taking place. There is a lot of early intervention, and the very awareness that early intervention can really change lives has really gotten there. People have begun to understand that. Education, there's a lot happening. There is the CBSE that is allowing a lot of accommodations to people with autism. We have the Right to Education Act that ensures that people with disabilities, including people with autism, get admission into all schools and not just government schools. And there has been a certain amount of movement in post-secondary education. There has always been people with autism studying in college. But these were the ones who went by without being identified because the symptoms or the signs of autism, it's a terrible word to use anyway, the signs were not so evident. But now there are people with autism who clearly are autistic, are getting admission into colleges. And I know that in Delhi we have places like Ambedkar University and Ansal's University and Ashoka University, all of which give admission to people with autism with the awareness and understanding that these are people who have very different needs. So there's been a lot of movement there. Work and employment, not enough, but still there is a certain amount of work happening. Open employment has started off. Organizations and companies like JP Morgan, SAP Labs, Lemon Tree Hotels, Taj Sats, all of them have started opening up to employing people with autism, people who come there with a clear diagnosis. And of course, there is stuff happening in the area of future life, adult life, when families are no longer there, with group homes and more than group homes, like institutions for residences opening up for people with autism across the country. Having said all the things that are happening, and the nice things are easier to talk about, oh yes, I forgot the laws and policies. India had ratified the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and based on that, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act has come about, which gives place to people with autism. We've always had the National Trust Act for about 10 years now, 18 years actually, and the National Policy on Disability, which was written in 2006, is being revised to bring it in synchronicity with the new Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. In addition, there are lots of notifications in education, travel is easier, possibilities of employment. Parents and persons with autism, if they do not want a transfer, can have those stayed. So a lot of stuff that has been happening. However, the challenges remain. I'm not able to move it forward, it's going back. Why is that happening? Yeah. So there are a lot of challenges that remain, right? So what are some of these challenges? One, of course, is the numbers. We are a country of 1.2 billion. And that is a huge challenge. It's a number that's kind of mind-boggling. If somebody told me I'll give you 1.2 billion rupees, I wouldn't know what to do with it. And that's the number of people we really have in this country. And like I mentioned earlier, we do not have any studies on prevalence rates. However, if we extrapolate numbers from other studies into our population, what we have is a population of an estimated 12 million persons with autism. However, if we go with a number like, say, 1 in every 58 or 1 in every 68, as Ben mentioned, that will shoot up to 17 million. But if we take a far more conservative estimate of, say, 10 million persons with autism, what do we have for them? Do we really have services for 10 million individuals with autism in this country? Again, no studies have been done, but if I were to make a guess, if any of us were to make a guess, we know that that is not there. Demand far outstrips all services that are available. Let's look at school placements, for instance. There are maybe around 200 special needs schools in the country, not more than that, maybe a few numbers here and there. Yes, regular schools are beginning to take in people with autism, but how many of them? Given by the numbers that we know that are sitting at home, especially persons with autism from the economically disadvantaged sections who do not get any schooling, there is just a tiny percentage as yet that get any form of education. And even the ones who do get into school, what kind of education are they really getting? That is something that we need to think about. We just heard Ben speaking about the different ways that autism affects an individual. And that is also what affects school learning. We very often forget when we are teaching them that these are people, to give a little example, have a lot of difficulty in generalizing something they have learned in one situation into a different situation. And when they're not able to do that, they tend to fall behind in learning. And all of us who work with kids with autism, we will know that there are children in schools, in the early years, in grades 1, 2, 3, who seem to be doing very well. They seem to be topping the class. They're the best students there. Why? because they're using their rote memory to cope. When they don't understand what is happening, they just learn things up. And they really, because in the earlier classes, all you have to do is learn things by heart, and they do very well. But then when they hit class 4, or they get into grade 5, 6, 7, as they get into higher classes, it gets more and more difficult, because there is that much you can learn by rote and just bring out on your answer papers. And eventually, when a lot of these people, they leave school, they really don't have any learning. We have adults come to us who have no skills in critical thinking and problem solving, because none of this has ever been done with them. All they have done is learn things up, even managed to finish the school education, but they really don't have an education at all. So that is something to think about. We also have a lot of trained professionals, trained in various areas. They're trained, for instance, in occupational therapy or speech therapy, or in teaching as special educators, or even regular teachers. But are they really trained in teaching people with autism? Do they have the understanding of what autism is? Do they have an experience in teaching them? And a lot of the teachers that we have right now, or other professionals, are people who do not really understand autism. So that is another big challenge that is out there. And I talked about the work and employment options. If you do not have an understanding of problem solving, critical thinking, if you do not understand how to take care of yourself in a physical space, if you do not know how to travel on your own independently, even if you finish school and you're not able to do any of these things, how are you going to work? So, our people are not being prepared for employment. I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. And workplaces are often not ready to take them on, even though there are a few organizations that are beginning to make a change. And then, of course, there will be many people with autism who would be able to live independently without any problems. But there will be a large number who will always require some kind of support. There will be some who will live independently with a certain amount of support, somebody coming in once a week, once a month, checking up on them, making sure they are fine. But in India, we don't have that system of social workers, which is there in many other countries, who would go and check on these people. So what happens? And what about the ones who need a lot more support, who will not be able to live independently at all? In India, we do have a few institutions that are residences. They're not really group homes the way we think of it in other countries, but they're more like institutions. And what happens there? The ones that are started off, they've been started off by really dynamic people wanting to bring about change. But once you move to the second generation, the institutions that are there catering for the last maybe 30 years or so, things there are not that good at all, because they really don't have an understanding of autism. And recently, one of our team members had visited one such residence. It's been running for many years with really good-hearted people, but really no understanding of autism. And what she found was that there was a dormitory. There were about 30 people living there. And in the middle of that, at the back, there was a cage with a 6-square-foot area. And within that cage was a young man who was unclothed. Sorry, I'm taking this apart. Unclothed and locked up inside that. And when she checked, what she found was that he wasn't locked up because they were trying to be mean. He was locked up because there was not really much structure in that place. Sometimes breakfast would happen before bath, sometimes bath would happen, it would switch. Sometimes they would suddenly be taken off to do something that they were not supposed to be doing. And this young man, the anxiety in him would rise to such a level that he would eventually hit out. And when he hit anyone, 4 people would come, grab hold of him, and put him in there. And then in frustration, he would take his clothes off. So there he was, in open view of everyone, no clothes on, locked up in that cage. And apparently that was a common occurrence. And it never occurred to anyone, including his parents, that this is a terrible thing that is happening. So we have to think of what is happening with the group homes that we are thinking of setting up. Even the services, the limited services that we have extremely restricted reach. They are limited to the cities, to the bigger towns, and that's about it. Even within the cities, the reach does not percolate down to those who do not have the financial means. And even then, it's further restricted because we have these services in certain parts of the country. And there are certain parts of the country where there are practically no services. There are 2 or 3 states where there is absolutely nothing, and there are some states where there is a lot happening. So there is this patchy, uneven spread of services. So somebody from a state where there is very little happening has to travel many miles to get to another state where services might be available. And how many of them really have the means or the capacity to do that? And then what we have is special needs services that are coming up, which is a wonderful and welcome thing, but they're not regulated. If we take the example of school education, for instance, regular schools, there is a certain amount of monitoring, the state does it, the center does it, but when you have special needs services, there is really no monitoring. Shops just open up. Anybody can open up a shop and start providing therapy. So for instance, on Tuesday, somebody came to me and said that there is this place that is providing a speech therapy that will ensure that every child with autism comes there, starts speaking without the need for crutches like signs, communication cards, or electronic communicators. Now, obviously, when a parent sees that, the parent thinks, oh, this is something that is going to fix my child. But how honest is that? And that is what is happening in many parts. And then we have the cure lobby that really feeds on the vulnerability of parents, and also, unfortunately, the blame that often is placed at parents for creating autism in their children. And unfortunately, this is a belief that is alive and kicking and comes from individuals who you would imagine were far more enlightened, who actually say that parents cause autism. So when parents are dealing with this, the first thought they have, and karma, and the stigma that goes with it, that I have in some way caused my child's autism, you want to do something to make sure that the autism goes away. And you start off with this negative perspective of a condition that is a part of your child's intrinsic being. You start off life and you feed that into your child. And then you go forth looking for cures. And the cure industry is not new in India. 30 years back, it was there. There was Learn All Plus that was curing people with autism. AIT was big in India and was supposedly curing every child with autism. 15 years back, there was Secretin. I don't know if some of you will remember Secretin, and I know that there was parents would put together ₹1.50 and travel to this particular city in India to give Secretin shots to their children that would cure them of their autism. 15 years later, those parents realized that they wasted their time, their child's life, and their money, and nothing has happened. But in the initial phase, when you start these cures, you believe that the change is going to happen. And unfortunately, these cures come from well-established people. So parents fall prey to that. And some of the things we have are hyperbaric oxygen therapy, stem cell therapy, chelation, bleach. We are feeding bleach to our children. And camel milk, which is curing autism. And I think to myself, if camel milk could cure autism, why did I see so many kids with autism in Kazakhstan? They drink camel milk. It should have disappeared from there. But in India, we do have families traveling to Rajasthan, where there are unfortunately 2 ladies from 2 different countries who are selling camel milk on a regular basis to families, right? And then Lupron therapy, chemical castration. And I think to myself, would I want to drink bleach, or would I want to do something like castrate myself? How can I do this to my child? And the fear is that we are slowly heading towards turning into the last frontier of autism quackery. And this is something that we really, really need to do something about. And then we have this whole confusion between autism and intellectual disability. When my son had received a diagnosis, what I was told repeatedly by many people was that autism is just intellectual disability, just more violent and difficult to teach. And that is what I believed for a long time, till his behavior started going through the roof by the time he was in his teens. And I began to educate myself about autism and realize how completely different the two conditions were. And that is when really change started happening in him. But unfortunately, this is something still very strongly prevalent. And this is something that we need to address. When the Rights with Persons with Disabilities Act came about, we all celebrated. I know that I celebrated. I was so excited we've finally done it. And then I read the fine print. And I don't know how many of you have gone through the Act, because in the Act, autism is a kind of intellectual disability. It comes under intellectual disability. So what does that mean in real life? That if I'm an individual who has autism, but I do not have any intellectual disability, I cannot have any of the entitlements under the Act that goes to persons with autism. And right now, it does not matter because there are too few people with autism trying to claim those entitlements. But in time, as things change, there will be some bureaucrat who will get up and say, but you cannot get anything under this. You cannot have that education. You cannot have that job because you do not have intellectual impairment. So what if you have autism? And this is something that is a big challenge that we really need to look at. Resistance to reasonable accommodation. If a place did not have a ramp, and I was wonderfully delighted to see there's a ramp here. If a place does not have a ramp, we all get up and say how disabled, unfriendly this place is. But without any hesitation, we pull out that one ramp that persons with autism need, which is environmental adaptations, visuals that help them understand what is going to happen. For some reason, because I suppose that persons with autism look so typical, we are very unwilling to make any of the accommodations in teaching methods, in changing the environment. For instance, here the lights just went down, but I know that these lights bother a lot of people with autism. But schools are unwilling, for instance, to change their lights or put up any visuals. So for instance, last week we had this young boy who came. The school was debating whether to tell the parents to take him out from school. And what was the reason? Because they said he was hypersexual. So I asked, what do you mean by hypersexual? Tell me what happens. And they said, oh, he goes around trying to expose himself to the girls, etc., etc. And I said, generalizations are not good because your personal biases come in that. So I discussed further to try and find out exactly what was happening. And what I figured is that he would often be found with his pants unzipped. And then further investigation revealed that if he had not been to the washroom in the morning, his pants were zipped. It's only if he went to the washroom, his pants were unzipped. And then further investigation revealed that, as happens often with some of us, he kept forgetting the sequence of things that he's supposed to do. So I asked the school, have you thought of putting up a little visual that says, latch the stall, unzip pan, urinate, zip up, unlatch, wash hands? They said no. And I said, but have you tried that? Try it and see. And they did. And his hypersexuality was gone. And they presumed that here is a man who's hypersexual. And there was this other 17-year-old who was in class 12. And the school had been, they came saying that, he's become violent these days, we don't know what to do, etc. We are thinking of telling the parents to take him out. And it turned out that, again, they used to provide him with visuals till he was in class 10, and then they decided that he doesn't need it anymore, and then there are sudden changes happening. When math class is supposed to happen, they suddenly have to go to the auditorium, then they're sent off to the gymnasium, and this guy's anxiety became so much that he had started hitting the teacher off and on. So when I asked the teacher, but why are you not providing him the structure that would help him? And he said, he's done it for 10 years, why should he use it now? So I just reached out and took off her glasses. And I said, you've used your glasses all your life. You don't need it now. And that is the problem with the way we view autism. We believe the ramp must always be there for somebody who needs it. The braille must always be there for somebody who needs it. But for people with autism, after a while, they don't need it. They must become normal after all this work. Until that changes, I do not think we'd be able to help our people very far. So some of the things, there is tons of things that needs to be done. And there are 3 quick things that I would like to mention. One is demystify professional knowledge. There is still this, esoteric thing around how you have to teach people with autism. Parents can never understand what it is. They must only have to rely on a professional. And then what you have, and I'm not talking about India, I'm talking about, say, for instance, this friend in Switzerland. Her son was going to a day program every day. He'd be out of the house. Now he's turned 18 and at home. She hasn't a clue what to do with him. Children in India, they spend very little time in the school. They're at home most of the time. If we do not empower the parents, how are they going to help their children? And professional knowledge is not really rocket science. It's rooted in a deep understanding of autism, common sense, and I know I'm simplifying it, but really it is something that any parent can learn. And yet, we make sure that when I'm working with the child, the parents must not observe. If we don't share with the parents, we do not help the individuals with autism that we work with. And also, when we share knowledge, we empower parents. And when we empower parents, they become change makers. Most of the schools in this country, for instance, have been started by parents who got empowered. And because they were empowered, they've been able to change the landscape to such an extent. And when you empower parents, every parent, there's a ripple effect. That parent helps other parents to become change makers. And this is something because in a country of at least 10 million individuals with autism, we can start all the institutions and schools and vocational centers we want, but we will never reach the last person. If we just rely on some professional starting something, if we make parents partners in what we are doing, change will come far quicker. And then, of course, self-advocacy. Give people with autism the opportunity for self-determination, for choice. Let them make their mistakes. Give them the dignity of risk. And that is something, as a country, we tend to be very overprotective. And we do not give people with autism that opportunity for making mistakes and learning from their mistakes. Because only when they do these things can they become self-advocates. And it is only empowered parents and strong self-advocates who can make a push for evidence-based practices versus chasing the chimera of cure. Thank you.